The creek behind Eli Carter's small woodland home had always been his refuge, a narrow ribbon of water whispering through mossy stones and bent reeds, a place where the world felt smaller and quieter, where the scars of old service and louder memories loosened their grip. He went there every evening as the sun leaned low, boots abandoned, sleeves rolled, letting the cold water numb his hands and the ache that never truly left his bones. That evening felt different from the first breath. The air heavier, the forest unusually still, birds silent as if listening. Eli slowed his steps without knowing why, instincts older than thought guiding him, the instincts of a former soldier who had learned to notice when the world held its breath. He heard the splash before he saw her, soft and careful, not the careless sound of an animal. His hand went to his side out of habit, finding nothing. He had left weapons behind years ago. He told himself that life was simpler now, quieter, but his pulse betrayed him as he eased closer through the brush. Then he saw her. She stood in the creek where sunlight broke through the leaves, water sliding over skin that shimmered like polished pearl. Not human yet breathtakingly close, her form graceful, alien lines softened by the way she moved. Long dark hair floated around her shoulders, eyes closed as she cupped water over her arms. There was no armor, no weapon, no sign of threat, only a quiet vulnerability that struck Eli harder than any battlefield memory. He froze, breath caught in his throat, 1,000 instincts screaming at once, to hide, to run, to protect, to understand. He had seen aliens before during the war, armored figures behind visors, enemies reduced to shapes in smoke and fire. But this was different, this was intimate, almost sacred, and for a moment he felt like an intruder in a moment never meant for him. A branch snapped beneath his boot. Her eyes flew open. They locked onto his, and her face changed. The smooth calm shattered into raw fear, pupils flaring, skin along her cheek rippling as faint luminous markings ignited like starlight beneath water. A sharp breath left her lips. Not a scream, but something tighter, more controlled. The sound of someone trained to survive. Not panic, but recognition. Eli raised his hands slowly, heart hammering so hard it hurt. Words tangled uselessly in his throat. He wanted to say sorry, wanted to say he would leave, wanted to say he meant no harm, but none of it came out right. His voice finally broke free in a rough whisper. I did not know anyone was here. I will go. She did not move. The markings on her face shifted again, forming delicate angular patterns, unmistakably royal from what Eli remembered of alien command ranks. His blood went cold. Princess. The word landed in his mind with terrifying weight. This was no wanderer, no refugee child. This was someone important, someone whose disappearance would ripple across systems. Her gaze searched him with frightening intensity, taking in his posture, the old scars along his arms, the way he stood despite trying to look harmless. She saw the soldier in him even without armor, and something in her expression changed again. Fear giving way to calculation mixed with desperation. You are human, she said softly, her voice melodic yet strained, accented with the cadence of worlds far beyond this creek. You should not be here, they will come. The forest seemed to lean closer at her words. Eli swallowed. They who, he asked, though part of him already knew. Soldiers, she replied, my father's enemies and my father's allies. Law does not protect me anymore, only chains disguised as duty. I escaped during transit. My warship fell from orbit beyond the ridge. I came here to hide, to breathe, just once, before fate found me again. Her words hit him in waves: warship, law, fate. Things he had tried to forget after the ceasefire. The universe never really stopped asking for soldiers, it only changed the uniforms. Eli stepped back carefully, giving her space, his voice steadier now. I will not tell anyone. I swear, you can finish. I will wait far away. He meant it with everything he had left in him. She studied him, then shook her head slowly, water dripping from her hair. It is too late. You have seen my face. Recognition binds destiny in my people's law. If they track me here and know you saw me, they will not let you live. Not because you are guilty, but because you exist. Fear flared sharp and cold in his chest. Not for himself alone, but for her. She stood there exposed, hunted, carrying the weight of an empire she clearly did not want. Eli felt something old and dangerous awaken. The part of him that once stood between civilians and orbital fire, the part that refused to step aside. Then we do not let them take you, he said quietly, surprising himself with the certainty in his own voice. I know how soldiers think. I know how tracking works, and I know this land. You are not alone anymore. Her eyes widened, disbelief and fragile hope colliding. You would risk yourself for an alien you met moments ago. Eli met her gaze, memories of burning skies reflected back at him. I already lost enough by obeying orders. I will not lose my soul by walking away. Somewhere far above, unseen engines hummed, a distant vibration rolling through the earth like a warning. The creek kept flowing, unaware, but destiny had already turned its face toward them, and neither of them could look away anymore. Eli moved first, not because he was fearless but because fear had finally sharpened into purpose. He turned away from the creek and scanned the treeline, listening past the rush of water, past his own breathing. For anything that did not belong, the distant hum she mentioned crept through the soil again, faint but real, the kind of vibration orbital craft made when they whispered to sensors rather than skies. We need to get you covered, he said softly, keeping his voice low. There is a storm cellar under my house, old reinforced concrete, buried deep, no signal leaks, no open angles. I built it after the war when I learned how fragile walls really are. She hesitated only a heartbeat, then nodded, stepping from the water with careful urgency. Eli forced himself to look away as he shrugged off his jacket and held it out blindly. When she took it, her fingers brushed his wrist, cool and trembling despite her composure. The touch sent a jolt through him stronger than any shock round. She wrapped herself quickly, pulling the fabric close as if it were armor. They moved through the forest together, not running yet, but not lingering either. Eli chose paths that bent and doubled, routes he had learned while hunting and healing, places where leaves swallowed footprints and water masked scent. Behind them the creek kept singing like nothing had changed. Ahead the world felt narrower, heavier, each step binding them tighter to the choice he had already made. She kept glancing at him as they walked, studying him with the same intensity he had seen in commanders before battle. You are damaged, she said quietly, not unkindly, but precise. Your body remembers war even when your hands are empty. Eli gave a humorless breath. Guess some things do not unlearn. What about you, princess? You move like someone trained to survive, not someone raised to rule. Her jaw tightened, the faint markings along her cheek flickered beneath the jacket collar. I was raised to be a symbol, she replied, but symbols still bleed. When the succession war began, my face became a weapon others wanted to control. Law demanded obedience. Fate demanded sacrifice, so I ran. They reached the house just as the sky darkened unnaturally, clouds folding inward like a bruise spreading across the heavens. Eli felt it then, the wrongness. This was no weather shift. This was atmosphere bending under mass, warship descent masked as shadow. Inside, he led her down the narrow steps to the cellar, sealing the hatch above them. The room filled with the low amber glow of emergency lights. Thick walls wrapped them in silence, broken only by the faint thud of her heartbeat echoing in his ears. She leaned against the wall, breathing slowly, holding herself together through sheer will. For a moment neither spoke, the weight of proximity heavy. Two survivors from opposite sides of a galaxy, sharing a buried room on a forgotten planet. Then the first impact came, distant but unmistakable. The ground shuddered, dust trickled from the ceiling. Eli closed his eyes briefly. The sound took him back to drop pods and burning soil. They are here, he murmured. She nodded, fear flickering openly now. They will scan for me, life signatures, thermal residue, panic patterns. They will not expect you to interfere. Humans rarely do when empires arrive. A bitter smile touched Eli's mouth. They have not met enough of us then. Another vibration rolled through the cellar, closer this time. Eli moved to a battered console along the wall, fingers flying over switches. Ancient tech hummed awake. A low-frequency scrambler built from scraps and stubbornness. It will not hide us forever, he said, but it will confuse them by time. She watched him with something like awe. You prepared for this, she said, not this exactly, but the idea that war never really leaves. Eli met her gaze. It follows some of us home. Above them came the distant crackle of atmospheric displacement. Then a voice, amplified and cold, echoing through the forest and into Eli's bones. By order of galactic law, surrender the royal asset. Resistance will be met with force. Her breath caught, her shoulders shaking once before she stilled them. That is my uncle's banner. She whispered, he claims legality, not justice. He will burn your land to retrieve me. Rage flared hot and sudden in Eli's chest. Not loud, not wild, but focused. The kind that had once steadied his aim in impossible moments. He thought of this quiet place, of the creek, of a woman who only wanted to breathe free for a moment over my dead body. He said, not as a threat, but a promise. She looked at him then, truly looked, and something shifted between them. A connection forged not by romance but by shared refusal, shared defiance. Destiny did not feel like chains in that moment. It felt like a blade offered willingly. Eli opened a compartment beneath the console, revealing a case wrapped in oilcloth. He hesitated only a second before unsealing it. Inside lay an old rifle, human-made, modified beyond regulation. He lifted it with reverence and resolve. I swore I was done with this, he said quietly, but I never swore I would let monsters win. The cellar trembled again. Closer still. Dust raining down as footsteps echoed above. Heavy and metallic. Soldiers moving through his home. Scanning, claiming, violating. She reached out, gripping his arm, her touch grounding. Whatever happens, human. Know that you did not choose wrong. Eli squeezed her hand once, steady and certain, then turned toward the stairs, as the war he thought he had left behind finally caught up to him, and fate, patient and merciless, knocked on his door. The first shot echoed through the house like a memory tearing open, not loud but final. A precise crack that told Eli his home was no longer shelter but terrain. Dust burst from the ceiling above the cellar stairs. The lights flickered, and the hum of the scrambler wavered as if even the machine felt fear. Eli steadied his breathing, feeling the familiar narrowing of the world, sounds sharpening, time stretching thin. He had sworn never to step into this space again, but the space had found him anyway. Some wars did not end, they only waited. They are probing the structure, he murmured, pulse calm despite the chaos. Looking for panic, looking for movement. Stay still, stay quiet. She nodded, but her eyes were far away, luminous patterns creeping along her neck and jaw. Brighter now, alive with meaning, not fear alone. Something older stirring beneath her skin. Eli noticed how the air around her seemed to bend slightly, like heat haze without warmth. What are those markings? He asked softly, not taking his eyes from the stairwell. She hesitated, then answered because honesty felt necessary now. They are not decoration. They are not rank alone. They are inheritance. When my face changes, it means my body remembers what my mind tries to forget. Another impact shook the walls, closer, heavier, metal boots moving with calculated patience. Not rushing, confident, as if time itself belonged to them. Inheritance of what? Eli asked, adjusting his grip on the rifle. She swallowed, voice low, controlled. My people were not always rulers. We were engineered during the first expansion, designed to interface with warships, to guide battle with instinct rather than code. Our royal line carries the original pattern, living command. When I am seen, truly seen, the fleet can feel me. Eli's blood went cold, so that is why seeing your face matters. Yes, she said, pain flickering across her expression. Recognition triggers resonance. Once a human has seen me unmasked, the bond echoes, not loyalty, not control but awareness. You are now visible to them through me, which means you are already marked. Above them, the floor groaned, something heavy tearing through furniture. Eli pictured armored figures stepping over his table, scanning walls that still smelled of coffee and rain. Anger rose sharp and protective. They took too much from too many worlds, always justified by law. I do not care if they see me, he said, voice firm. They do not get you. Her gaze softened, something like grief mingling with gratitude. You speak like someone who has already lost everything. He gave a faint smile, almost sad. I lost enough to know what is worth keeping. A new sound cut through the cellar, a high-pitched whine. Eli stiffened, breaching charge. He grabbed her wrist and pulled her back just as the stairwell exploded inward. Concrete shattered. Dust and smoke poured down like a collapsing sky. Emergency lights died, plunging them into darkness broken only by the glow of her markings. Through the smoke came silhouettes, tall, angular, armor etched with sigils of authority. Rifles humming with contained power. A voice followed, smooth and cruel, Princess, return to us, your fate has already been written. Her hand tightened around Eli's arm. Fear and fury tangled. That voice? She whispered. He taught me to smile while planets burned. Eli raised his rifle and fired, not wildly, not in panic, but with the precision of a man who knew how to make each breath count. The first soldier fell, armor pierced where human engineers had learned all weaknesses eventually repeated. The second staggered, shielding flaring uselessly as the confined space betrayed them. The soldiers returned fire, plasma scoring walls, heat tearing the air. Eli moved without thinking, pulling her behind a support pillar. Fragments biting into his shoulder. Pain flared white, then settled into something manageable. He had lived with worse. "Do not look at them," she said urgently, voice strained. "If you meet their gaze while my markings are active." The resonance deepens. Eli nodded, focusing on angles and shadows, trusting her even as the cellar burned. Another soldier advanced, voice sharp with authority. "Human, stand down. You are interfering in lawful recovery." "Law does not mean right," Eli shot back, squeezing the trigger again. The soldier dropped, armor smoking. Something changed then, not just in the fight but in the air itself. Her glow intensified, patterns shifting faster, more complex, lines spiraling like constellations mapping themselves onto flesh. She cried out softly, not in pain but in strain. Eli felt it, a pressure behind his eyes, a pull like gravity changing direction. "They feel me," she gasped. "The fleet is aligning. If this continues, the warship above will lock onto this location completely. Everything within kilometers will burn." Eli turned toward her despite the warning, meeting her eyes just long enough to understand the depth of her fear. Then looked away, decision already made. "Then we end this here," he said. "Is there a way to sever it?" She shook her head, desperation rising. "Not without death. Either mine or theirs." Footsteps echoed again, heavier now, command units arriving. The cellar filled with smoke and falling debris. Eli checked his remaining ammo. Not enough, never enough, but he had never needed fair odds. He leaned close to her, voice steady. "Then we make them hesitate, long enough for you to choose your own fate." Her breath hitched. "You would stand against a fleet for that?" Eli smiled grimly in the dark. "I have stood against worse for less." Above them, engines roared louder. The warship descending, destiny tightening its grip, and in the glow of alien light and human defiance, the universe watched to see which would break first. The roar above them deepened into something vast and absolute, the kind of sound that erased scale. The warship was no longer a shadow in the clouds but a presence pressing down on the land, gravity bending to its will. Eli felt it in his teeth, in his bones, in the old scars that had learned to recognize extinction before it arrived. The soldiers in the cellar hesitated, not from fear but from protocol, weapons lowering a fraction as a new signal pulsed through their armor. Her markings flared in response, brilliant and blinding, casting alien constellations across cracked concrete. She cried out again, dropping to one knee, hands pressed to her temples as if holding herself together. Eli moved to her side without thinking, shielding her with his body even as plasma fire scorched the pillar behind them. "Stay with me," he said urgently, grounding her with his voice. "Look at me if you have to. Forget them." She shook her head violently. "You do not understand. It is not just that they can feel me. I am not only a beacon, I am a key." The words cut through him sharper than any blade. "Key to what?" Her breath came ragged now, truth spilling because there was no more time to guard it. "The royal line was never meant to rule forever," she said. "Our bodies were designed as living interfaces, but one generation was chosen to end the cycle, a failsafe hidden in flesh. When a royal willingly bonds with an outsider species under threat, the command authority transfers." Eli froze, heart slamming. "Transfers to who?" "To the one who stands as equal, not subject," she whispered, eyes glowing fiercely. "You, Eli Carter." The universe seemed to tilt. The soldiers stared in stunned silence, weapons trembling, their armor lights flickering as systems struggled to reconcile conflicting authority. Above them the warship's roar faltered, engines stuttering mid-descent like a beast choking on its own certainty. "That is impossible," one of the soldiers barked, voice cracking. "Humans are not compatible." She rose unsteadily to her feet, pain etched into every line of her face but resolve burning brighter. "Compatibility was never biological," she said. "It was moral. The ancient code seeks defiance, not obedience, protection, not conquest, a refusal to let law become cruelty." Eli backed away a step, shaking his head. "No, I did not agree to this, I just wanted to help you escape." She met his gaze fully now, resonance surging. "Because you chose to help without being commanded. The bond already formed when you refused to turn away at the creek. When you chose me over safety, destiny did not ask permission. It observed your choice and answered. The cellar lights surged back to life, consoles flaring as alien and human tech began to speak. Eli's head throbbed, images flooding his mind unbidden. Star maps unfolding. Fleets aligned, battle lines drawn across galaxies. He saw supply routes, choke points, hidden weapons sleeping inside moons. It was too much, overwhelming, terrifying. Make it stop, he groaned, clutching the wall. She stepped closer, placing her glowing hand against his chest, grounding him as he had grounded her. I am sorry, she said softly. This was never meant to be gentle. But you are not alone in it. I am still here with you. Above them, a new voice thundered through the structure. Deeper, older, stripped of pretense. Unauthorized transfer detected. Stand by for planetary cleansing. The uncle, she whispered, his will overriding the council. He would rather burn this world than lose control. Eli straightened slowly, pain and fear burning away into something fierce and steady. Images in his mind sharpening. No longer chaos but clarity. If he could see them, he could command them, not through dominance but alignment. He stepped forward into the open, soldiers parting instinctively, armor systems dimming as his presence rippled through them like a new gravity. He raised his voice, not shouting, not pleading, but speaking as one who belonged. Stand down. The words carried, not just through air but through signal and space. The soldiers' weapons powered down in unison, confusion and awe rippling through their ranks. Above, the warship shuddered violently, engines flaring erratically as control wrestled itself apart. Impossible. The uncle's voice snarled. You are human. Eli closed his eyes, feeling the network around him. Millions of lives bound by commands they never chose. I am, he said calmly, and I choose mercy. For a heartbeat, everything hung suspended. Then the warship's descent halted completely, massive engines cutting to idle, shields retracting like claws unclenching. The sky outside brightened as clouds tore apart, sunlight spilling down onto a battlefield that never quite became one. She sagged against him, exhaustion crashing in now that the surge faded. He caught her, holding her as the glow along her skin dimmed to a gentle shimmer. It worked, she breathed, wonder and disbelief entwined. The fleet has paused. They are listening. Listening to what? Eli asked quietly. To you, she said, smiling weakly. To a human who broke a cycle thousands of years old by refusing to obey a law that demanded sacrifice. Outside, sirens died. Engines powered down. Soldiers stood uncertain. No longer conquerors but witnesses. Eli looked down at her. At the alien princess who had turned his quiet life into the axis of empires. I never wanted power, he said. She met his eyes, warmth breaking through the fatigue. Neither did I. That is why it chose us. Above them, the warship remained frozen in the sky. Destiny no longer a blade at their throats but a question waiting for an answer. And for the first time, the universe held its breath not in fear, but in hope. Silence followed the halt like the pause after a scream, heavy and unnatural. The kind that made Eli's skin prickle because he knew better than to trust it. War never ended cleanly. It only changed shape. The soldiers in the cellar did not flee, did not attack. They simply stood frozen, weapons lowered, armor lights pulsing in uncertain rhythms as if awaiting permission from a sky that no longer answered them. Above, the warship hung motionless. An impossible mountain of metal suspended over a forgotten patch of forest, visible now through the shattered ceiling, blotting out half the sun. She pushed herself upright slowly, leaning on Eli's arm, her markings dim but not gone. They are arguing, she whispered, councils, admirals, dynasties that built themselves on obedience are panicking. What you did not just stop one ship. It echoed across the network. Eli felt it then, a distant pressure, like many eyes turning his way. Not hostile yet, but startled, curious, afraid. He staggered slightly, bracing himself against the wall. Stars flickered behind his vision, whole systems brushing his awareness. I can feel them, he said quietly, worlds, fleets, people who do not even know my name. Her voice trembled. That is the consequence of breaking a keystone. Every structure built around it begins to shift. Some will see hope, others will see catastrophe. As if summoned by her words, the air screamed. Not above them but far out. A sharp tearing sensation that made Eli gasp. Space itself folding, multiple signatures, she said urgently, eyes widening as her markings flared again. Not my uncle's fleet, others, rival powers, opportunists. Anyone who has waited centuries for a crack in imperial control. The cellar shook violently. Not from weapons but from gravity waves rippling outward as new warships tore into local space. Eli tasted blood, pressure crushing down as if the planet itself were being weighed. Outside alarms wailed again. Not alien this time but human, old emergency tones buried in forgotten systems. The world waking up to danger far larger than one man's land. If they fight here, Eli said grimly, this planet dies. She nodded, despair shadowing her features. The Empire kept battles away from core worlds by fear alone. You just removed that fear. Now everyone wants a piece of what falls next. A new voice cut through the chaos, not amplified from above but blooming directly inside Eli's mind. Layered, multitudinous, ancient human anchor, you have initiated a convergence event. Do you accept responsibility for stabilization? Eli sucked in a breath. Anchor, what the hell does that mean? Her eyes widened in shock. They are speaking to you directly. She whispered, that is not protocol, that is myth. The voice continued, calm and vast. Royal interfaces were designed to locate anchors among emergent species. Individuals capable of holding conflicting moral vectors without collapse. This function has not activated in 14,000 cycles. Eli laughed weakly, the sound almost hysterical. You picked the wrong guy. I am just someone who wanted to live quietly. Quiet lives do not resist fleets, the voice replied. Stabilization requires choice, dominance or balance, enforcement or mediation. Delay will result in multi-faction engagement and planetary annihilation probability exceeding 92%. Her hand tightened painfully on his arm. Eli, if you do nothing, they will tear this system apart. If you choose dominance, they will follow you out of fear and the Empire will simply change faces. If you choose balance, everyone will test you, everyone. He closed his eyes, images crashing through him. Not commands this time but consequences. Worlds liberated too fast collapsing into famine. Worlds held too tightly erupting in revolt. Soldiers born and dying under flags that meant nothing. He felt the weight of it pressing down, heavier than any rifle he had ever carried. Above them, the first shot fired, not at the ground but at the sky. A rival cruiser unleashing a probing beam toward the frozen Imperial warship. Shields flared instinctively, energy cascading like a newborn sun. The atmosphere ignited, clouds boiling away in incandescent rings. The planet screamed. Eli dropped to one knee, pain lancing through his skull. He could feel the feedback, every defensive response tugging at him through the bond. This is too much, he gasped. She knelt with him, face pale but resolute. Then let me share it, she said softly. This was never meant to be carried alone. I was raised to bear it. You were chosen to temper it. Before he could answer, she pressed her glowing forehead to his. The contact was electric and intimate. Alien thoughts braided with human memories. Childhood laughter tangled with palace corridors. Battlefields overlapped with ceremonial halls. Two lives colliding into something new. Something terrifyingly vast. The pain eased, spreading into clarity. Eli felt the network settle slightly. The voice returned, steadier now. Dual anchor confirmed, stabilization window extended. Outside, the sky burned as more ships arrived. Dozens now, different designs, different banners, old enemies and ancient rivals drawn like predators to wounded prey. Across the system, billions of lives hung in the balance of what he would do next. Eli opened his eyes, fire reflected in them. Then we make it clear, he said, voice low and unyielding. This world is not a prize. This system is closed. She stared at him, realization dawning. You are going to speak to all of them. He nodded, fear present but mastered. Not as a conqueror, not as a king, but as someone who has buried too many friends to let another war pretend it is inevitable. Above, the warship's massive hull began to rotate, weapons powering not to fire but to broadcast, energy building toward a signal that would reach across stars, the moment before everything changed again. And far beyond this small planet, in councils and war rooms and hidden strongholds, the galaxy leaned forward, realizing that the quiet human from a forest world was about to redraw the meaning of power, fate, and war itself. The signal surged outward like a held breath finally released. Not a weapon, Not a command pulse, but a declaration shaped from intent and resolve. Eli felt it tear through him as much as it flowed from him. Every thought sharpened into purpose. Every fear pressed flat beneath something stronger. Across the system, warships shuddered as the broadcast reached them, rival banners flickering on and off, crews staring at consoles that suddenly refused to obey simple orders. Not malfunctioning, not hacked, but questioning. The network no longer treated commands as absolute. Eli stood as the cellar dissolved around them, walls cracking, ceiling peeling away to reveal a sky filled with fire and impossible metal shapes. He could see them all now, fleets layered in orbit, some ancient and scarred, others sleek and hungry, each carrying histories of conquest or survival. He felt their captains hesitate as his presence brushed their awareness. This system is closed. His voice carried, not loud, not raised, but undeniable. You are standing over a living world, not a bargaining table, not a trophy. Withdraw or be remembered as the ones who chose destruction when restraint was offered. Instantly, backlash surged, minds slamming against his demands, threats, disbelief. You are human, you are unrecognized, you have no mandate. Who gave you authority? Eli's knees buckled for a heartbeat, the pressure nearly crushing. Then she was there beside him, her hand in his, her glow flaring brighter, steadying. Authority is not given, she said, voice joining his. It is demonstrated. This human stood unarmed before your warship and chose protection over power. That is the mandate you all lost. A shock wave rippled outward as several fleets disengaged instantly. Not out of submission but shock, centuries of certainty cracking. Others powered weapons higher in response, unwilling to let fear slip from their grasp. An energy spike screamed across the system, a cruiser from the outer factions breaking formation and firing again. This time not probing but lethal, a spear of annihilation racing toward the planet below. Eli felt it like a knife in his chest, instinct screaming to strike back, to crush, to end the threat before it reached atmosphere. The network offered him that option instantly, solutions blooming like deadly flowers, redirect, overload, erase. He hesitated. In that hesitation lived everything he was. No, he whispered, then louder, no. Instead of destroying the cruiser, he reached inside its systems, not to dominate but to reveal. He flooded its bridge with memories. The screams of planets burned for profit, the quiet grief of soldiers who followed orders they hated, the emptiness that followed victory without meaning. The beam faltered, destabilized, then collapsed into harmless light. The cruiser drifted powerless, weapons offline. Its crew stunned into silence. A gasp swept the network. You could have killed them, voices echoed. I could have, Eli answered, steady now despite the strain. And that is why I did not. If the new order begins with fear, it will end the same way the old one did. Pain surged through him suddenly, sharp and deep, blood trickling from his nose. The network fighting back, ancient safeguards flaring. Her grip tightened, grounding him again. Stay with me, she whispered urgently. Do not let it take you. He turned toward her, seeing not a symbol now but a person who had carried this burden alone for too long. I am still here, he said softly, because you are. Above them, the Imperial warship finally moved, not retreating, not attacking, but turning its massive hull to face the rival fleets, shields flaring wide, protective, a wall rather than a blade. The uncle's voice cut through the network again. Raw with fury and fear, you would shield traitors and invaders alike. You would erase hierarchy itself. Eli met that presence head-on. Eyes burning, hierarchy that demands sacrifice without consent deserves to fall. Your reign ends today. Not with your death, but with your irrelevance. For a long moment nothing happened. Then the warship's weapon ports sealed one by one. Command codes unraveling. The uncle's signal collapsing into static. His power stripped not by force but by refusal. Fleets loyal to him faltered, some retreating, others powering down in stunned disbelief. The strain finally caught up with Eli. His legs giving way as the sky slowly began to clear, fire fading to starlight, ships slipping back into distant orbits. She caught him as he fell, cradling his head against her chest, tears streaking silently down her face. You did it, she whispered, awe and fear mingling. You stood where empires stood and chose mercy. Eli laughed weakly, breath ragged. I was terrified the whole time. She smiled through tears. Then you were exactly who it needed. Around them, The forest smoldered but still lived. The creek still flowed, scarred but unbroken, and above, the galaxy reeled. Old laws cracked beyond repair. New paths uncertain and dangerous. Eli closed his eyes briefly, feeling the network recede slightly, the worst of the pressure easing. "This is not over, is it?" he asked softly. She shook her head, resting her forehead against his. "No, this is just the beginning. But this time we begin it together." And across the stars, from war rooms to refugee worlds, a truth spread faster than any fleet, that power had changed hands not through conquest, but through a single human choice to protect rather than destroy, and the universe would never be able to forget it. The signal did not fade when Eli's strength faltered. It lingered like an echo carved into reality itself, spreading beyond the system, beyond charts and borders, into places no fleet had reached in centuries. Places where hope had learned to stay quiet. Eli drifted in and out of awareness, carried by her arms as if gravity itself had softened for them. Each time his eyes opened, he saw stars moving, not in panic now but in cautious order. Ships withdrawing, formations breaking, long shadows lifting from the planet below. The forest breathed again, smoke thinning, birds daring to return. "You stayed," she whispered close to his ear, voice shaking with exhausted relief. "Even when the network tried to crush you, you stayed." He managed a faint smile. "I promised I would not walk away." She held him tighter, glowing markings finally dimming to gentle traces, their fury spent, their purpose fulfilled. For the first time since her birth she felt light, unbound, no longer a living key chained to war, but a choice made freely. Above them, the Imperial warship transmitted again. But this time the tone was different, stripped of command, stripped of arrogance. A neutral declaration rippling outward, hostilities suspended. All fleets disengage pending systemic arbitration. Violation will be recorded and responded to collectively. Collectively. She breathed, disbelief coloring the word. They are listening to each other instead of obeying one throne. Eli opened his eyes, focusing past the pain. "That is the only way this works, no single hand on the trigger." The ancient voice returned once more, softer now, no longer vast and cold but measured, almost respectful, convergence stabilized, anchor state sustained, precedent established, probability of large-scale galactic war reduced significantly, though not eliminated. Eli exhaled slowly. "That is the best anyone ever gets, right?" "Correct." The voice replied. "Balance is not peace. It is effort renewed endlessly." The connection receded, leaving behind quiet, true quiet, the kind that followed storms rather than explosions. She lowered him gently onto the grass outside what remained of his home. Sunlight touched his face, warm and real, grounding him more than any signal ever could. For a long while they lay there, side by side, watching contrails of retreating ships fade into nothing, listening to the creek reclaim its voice. The universe felt enormous again, but no longer hostile, just watchful. "You changed everything," she said finally, turning toward him, eyes searching his face, not as a princess, not as a symbol, but as someone who needed to understand the cost. "Do you regret it?" Eli considered the question honestly, feeling every ache, every loss waiting quietly in the future. Then shook his head. "No, if I had let them take you, if I had let fear decide, I would have survived, but I would not have lived." She smiled, a small, genuine thing untouched by politics or destiny. "Then neither would I." In the days that followed, emissaries arrived, not warships but envoys, cautious and uncertain. Alliances whispered rather than declared. Worlds once crushed by imperial law began to speak again. Rebellions paused, waiting, watching to see if this change was real or just another mask. Eli refused titles, refused crowns, refused thrones built in a hurry by frightened powers. Instead he asked for something simpler, councils with representation beyond bloodlines, systems where law could be questioned without annihilation, protection for worlds that wanted no part of empires at all. Some laughed, some resisted, some quietly complied, but none could ignore him, because they all felt it, the memory of a human who had stood unarmed beneath a warship and said no. She chose to stay with him, not as a ruler in exile but as a witness and a guide, helping him navigate the currents of alien politics, helping him understand what his choice had awakened. Together they became something unexpected, not leaders above others, but anchors among them. One evening, as the forest healed and new growth pushed through scorched earth, she returned to the creek, water cool and clear again. Eli watched from a respectful distance this time, smiling softly. Some moments deserved to remain sacred. When she looked back at him, face unhidden, unafraid, the markings faint and calm, the universe felt suddenly very small and very precious. Fate had tried to make them weapons, law had tried to make them tools, destiny had tried to make them symbols. They chose instead to be human and alien, together, standing quietly at the edge of a galaxy learning, slowly, painfully, how not to destroy itself again. The galaxy did not change all at once, it never does, it shifted the way mountains shift, slow enough to feel permanent, fast enough to crack what was brittle. Eli learned this in the weeks that followed as the noise of war gave way to the quieter weight of consequence. Messages arrived from worlds he had never heard of. Not demands, not pleas, but questions. How did you know when to refuse? How did you carry the fear without letting it turn into cruelty? He had no grand answers, only honesty. He told them he remembered the faces of those who paid the price when others chose comfort over courage. He told them fear never vanished. It only learned where to stand. She stood beside him through it all, no longer glowing with the urgency of inheritance, but radiant in something calmer, chosen. The markings on her skin now appeared only when she wished, no longer a leash pulled by distant fleets, but a language she spoke freely. When councils tried to crown her again, she declined with grace that left them unsettled. Power offered without chains frightened them more than rebellion ever had. They rebuilt the house slowly, stone by stone. Not because it mattered politically, but because it mattered to Eli. Because roots anchored even those who touched the stars. The cellar became a garden storage. The rifle stayed wrapped and buried beneath the floorboards. Not as a threat, but as a reminder of what he never wanted to need again. One night, beneath a sky finally free of shadows, she asked him a question she had carried quietly for days. What happens when they no longer need an anchor? When the galaxy stands on its own again? Eli considered the stars, their light older than every empire that had ever claimed eternity. Then we step back, he said. Destiny does not mean ruling forever. Sometimes it means knowing when to let go. She smiled at that, relief softening her eyes. My people forgot that part. Time passed, not peacefully, but purposefully. Conflicts still flared, voices still clashed, but annihilation became harder to justify when everyone remembered the moment restraint proved stronger than fire. Treaties were rewritten. Not perfect, but alive. Empires loosened their grip, some collapsing, some transforming, and through it all the idea spread quietly that law must answer to life, not the other way around. Eli never traveled far from the forest. Envoys came to him instead, walking paths rather than descending in flame. They listened better that way. She teased him once that he had become a myth disguised as a man. He replied that she had become a woman disguised as freedom. They laughed because laughter meant survival. On the anniversary of the day, everything changed. They returned to the creek together. The water clear, birds fearless, sunlight broken into gold by leaves. She stepped into the stream without hesitation, without secrecy, without fear. Eli watched openly now, not as an intruder, not as a guardian, but as someone who belonged. She turned toward him, face unchanged this time. No flaring light, no warning glow, just herself. This is where fate tried to bind us, she said softly. Eli nodded, and this is where we refused. She reached out, taking his hand, grounding and warm. Do you ever wonder why it chose you, out of all the worlds, all the soldiers? He squeezed her fingers gently. Maybe because I was tired of being told who my enemies were. Maybe because I still believed protecting one life mattered more than winning a war. Her eyes shimmered. Then destiny finally learned the difference. Above them, stars traced slow, patient arcs. Fleets moved but did not threaten. The galaxy breathed easier, not healed, but healing. A future no longer written in advance but shaped moment by those willing to choose again and again. Eli looked at her, the alien beauty who had once been hunted, who had once been a weapon disguised as royalty. Now simply someone standing barefoot in a creek behind a quiet home, and felt something settle in his chest that no title could touch. They did not become legends carved into stone or names shouted in victory halls. They became something rarer. A story whispered when power demanded obedience and someone dared to say no. Fate had knocked on a human door expecting surrender. It left having learned humility, and in a small forest where water still flowed and stars still watched, a human and an alien stood together, not as rulers of destiny, but as its proof that the universe could change when someone chose to see another not as a symbol, not as a prize, but as a life worth protecting, always.